Donald Trump seems to be a little emotional when it comes to his foreign policy decisions. In fact, during a Axios report, it was revealed that Trump actually wanted to sink so-called fast boats that Iran uses to harass our own Navy. Now, Trump repeatedly asked his national security team for plans to blow up Iranian fast boats in the Persian Gulf during his first year in office. So these fast boats are annoying, there's no question about that. However, Iran has used the fast boats less and less to harass the United States, but they are armed with machine guns and rocket launchers. The military will respond accordingly, but the reason why we don't sink those ships or those boats is because that will lead to war, which is exactly what Jim Mattis had told Trump. So Trump was quoted as saying the following: so these boats, they get in, they come in really fast, they come in really close, and they might have explosives on them and we don't even know. Can you believe this? And we don't do anything. This is according to Axios. Iran's fast boats were harassing US Navy vessels less than in previous years. Such a disproportionate response from Trump could have quickly metastasized into war with Iran. It's interesting because he seems to contradict himself. On one hand, he doesn't see the point in remaining in Syria. We agreed with him on that, so he's withdrawing troops. He doesn't understand why the United States is still involved in this war in Afghanistan, which is why he wants to bring half of the US troops from Afghanistan back to the United States. We agreed with him on that. But then on the other hand, he has these uninformed knee-jerk reactions to things that could pull us into more war, unnecessary wars. Yeah. So it just further proves that he's the type of person who really just shoots from the hip. He doesn't really have a strategy or a clear foreign policy moving forward.
I hear people are upset when I call the president dumb. I don't know what you want me to call him. So look, you're gonna be surprised by the first thing I say, which is defending Trump. You will not be surprised by the second. So I think there are two unacceptable things here, but the first is not related to Trump, it's Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. When the president asks you for an option on how to blow up the boats, you give him an option on how to blow up the boats. It's not negotiable. So I don't agree with Mattis. I think that was terrible. So if it doesn't matter if the president is wrong, he's asking you for an option, a military option. Your job as the defense secretary is to give him that military option.
I disagree with you 100%. I think in any other circumstance where you have a president who is at least somewhat informed and has the intellectual curiosity to sit through an intelligence briefing, then yes, I agree with you. But you need some mitigating factors within the Trump presidency. And in this case, Mattis luckily served as a mitigating factor. If it weren't for Mattis and he just did what Trump wanted and sunk Iranian fast boats, that would have pulled us into an unnecessary war.
No, I didn't say sink the boats. I said give them an option. So let me do point two and then see if you still disagree.
Okay.
But point two, the problem is not Mattis just deciding on his own that he's not gonna follow the president's order. What he should have done instead is say, Mr. President, here's your option for how we can blow the boats out of the water. It's very simple. This is the kind of missile that we would use and we would sink them. Then what would happen next is Iran would respond by doing X, and then we would have to respond by doing Y. And then that would increase the chances of war by, in our estimation, whatever the number is, 40%, 80%. And now here are the consequences of a war with Iran, and lay out all the consequences. Because then you've done your job and you've given the president all the options and consequences. The problem is Mattis short circuits the system because he knows the president is not intelligent enough to understand the consequence of his actions. So the underlying problem isn't that Trump is asking for options. The underlying problem is that the president is so unintelligent that the defense secretary doesn't want to give him options because he doesn't understand consequences of his actions. So at that point, Mattis has got to lay it all out for him. And if Trump says, yeah, blow him out of the water, then Mattis should resign and say, Mr. President, I'm confident that you are going to start a war that you do not want to start and you don't understand what you're doing. So I cannot follow that order. You should find a defense secretary that can follow that order. You have every right as president to have a defense secretary that'll follow your orders, but I'm not the guy to do it because I'm not going to unnecessarily start a war with Iran. So That would be honest, that would be principled and disciplined, right? Instead, he goes, well, he's so stupid, he doesn't realize what he's doing, but he's so stupid, he won't realize that I'm not even ever gonna give him that option. And by the way, that's what happened. So Mattis never gave him the option, and Trump forgot about it.
That's right. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I mean, look, you're making the assumption, and I'm not really sure why, that Trump would sit through an explanation, a lengthy, informed explanation about the consequences of sinking these boats.
Then, okay, no problem. No, do I think that Trump would understand or comprehend any of that? No, I think he's literally one of the least intelligent people in the country, period, okay? You're gonna think that's extreme statement. It's not. Everyone who works with him goes, in the immortal words of Rex Tillerson, his Secretary of State, effing moron. One of the dumbest people you'll ever meet, okay? So what should Mattis have done? If Mattis then says, Mr. President, I must explain to you the consequences of the war, and the president goes, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear it. I'd immediately call for the 25th Amendment. I would convene the cabinet and say the president is a child.
Well, that I agree with.
And he does not have the mental capacity to be president. This is a danger to the country and to the world. We must convene the cabinet to at least have a discussion of the 25th Amendment. If that gets me fired for insubordination, no problem at all. I can live with that. I can't live with starting a war with Iran if the president doesn't have any idea what he's doing, okay?
So his foreign policy advisor at the time, H.R. McMaster, did lay out the consequences, not in the way that you mentioned, but he essentially, I'm gonna give you the quote. So he said, Mr. President, this has happened in the past, meaning the Iranian fast boats harassing our military, but Department of Defense is telling us that it hasn't happened lately, so they're not that concerned about it. So he essentially gives Trump that statement and Trump backs off. But again, I mean, look, I agree with you in invoking the 25th Amendment and going after Trump in that way. But I think we've learned through this presidency, through the Trump era, that Republicans and his administration officials do not have the backbone to do that. They're not gonna do that.
Yeah.
And so if this is the only mitigating factor, then I'll take it, because I certainly don't want to start a war with Iran.
So, but I just want to be clear. If you're asking me why do I have this position that Mattis should have given him the options? Because there are two different problems here, guys. One is the temporary but very, very important and urgent problem of Donald Trump, who is mentally unstable and not fit to be president, cannot make decisions, does not understand the consequences. It's just, he's a danger to the country, okay, and to our democracy. So that's a gigantic problem. But do not take your eye off the other problem, which is the establishment saying, I don't care who the president is, right wing or left wing, I'm not gonna listen to the president, I'm just gonna do whatever I want. So, and you'll have to always think, what if the shoe was on the other foot? And I remember when Obama was president and he said, give me options on Afghanistan, increasing troops, keeping them the same, and withdrawing. And the Pentagon came back and they did not include the option of withdrawing. I would have fired that general on the spot. I asked you for an option on withdrawal, you didn't give it to me. Apparently you're hard of hearing or not that bright. You're fired. Who's next? Okay? So if let's say someone we support, Elizabeth Warren is president of the United States, she says, give me an option. Defense Secretary does not give her that option, fire him on the spot. Because and there's a giant difference between Elizabeth Warren, who is brilliant and a Harvard professor, and Donald Trump, one of the least intelligent people you've ever met in public life, had in public life. But you must do your job and you must do it in a principled way.
Right, and look, there's another difference, aside from the fact that we're dealing with someone who has some limitations when it comes to intelligence. Look, with Obama and Afghanistan, he wanted various options because he was genuinely curious, and more importantly, he wanted to make an informed decision moving forward. Trump didn't really want options. Trump wanted to sink the boats. He wanted to sink the boats. He didn't want options. He wanted to know exactly why we're not sinking the boats and when can we sink the boats. That's really where he was coming at it and where he was coming at it from. And so, look, again, I get what you're saying, but also consider the fact that this might have been one of the first times, maybe even only time, that Jim Mattis didn't want to provoke a war. Right?
Yeah, I know, that's unusual too. So normally guys like Mattis and the establishment push for more war. but they at least have enough sense to do it in a rational way. And at the time of their theoretically our choosing as the country, and through official channels, et cetera. Hey, we did these sanctions, we gave you this opportunity, et cetera. You want to be able to justify it to your allies, otherwise you won't have their backing, and then you'll be in a worse situation. Because it's one thing to attack Iran unilaterally and then risk your relationship with China, for example. It's another thing to build an alliance, et cetera. They did with Iraq. Now that alliance was poor in Iraq, and it was still a terrible decision, but there was a method to the madness. Here, there is no method, there's just madness. 2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.